We have already seen some significant cold fronts early in the season. Halloween, it was the coldest one since 1992. We had another significant front slice through central Florida early into the middle portion of November. So, does that mean we're going to have an exceptionally cold winter when it comes to the months of December, January, and February? Not so fast. So, what we're looking at here is your typical La Nina pattern. You may have heard we're officially in a La Nina. And for the Southeast, it typically, and you're going to hear me say the word typically a lot because it doesn't always pan out like this, but it typically means, there it is again, that we are warmer than normal and drier than normal in the Southeast. That includes the state of Florida. So we typically get that ridge to build out west, closer to Alaska, the core of the cold of winter from the Dakotas, the Intermountain West, into the upper Midwest, Great Lakes even, and then a very active storm track through the Northeast, leaving the Southeast high and dry, literally warmer than normal and drier than normal. The one thing that could throw a wrench into the winter forecast, and by the way, for the month of December, on an average temperature basis, I think we're going to be right around normal. I think December gives us the most variability to have a couple of cold shots and then counteracted by some surges of warmth as well in the month of December. Once we get to the middle of January, I think that's when we might start running away or run away with the very, very warm temperatures that we're going to end that 3-month period with above normal temperatures. I think February could be very, very warm and much above normal and much, much drier than normal. So some of the things that we're watching out for. The thing that could throw a wrench into it, though, is it is a weak La Nina and could be bullied by some of the other climate oscillations that we forecast on a long range scale. You may have heard of the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Arctic Oscillation. That's what tracks the polar vortex, if it's stable or not. And there it is, hanging up near the poles. When it's unstable in the Arctic Oscillation's negative, that allows the jet stream to buckle at the surface or in the troposphere and then work its way down and send us these cold blasts as we see maybe a couple times every other year, something like that, as it works its way through. Typically, we see one of these big disruptions once every other year. But these oscillations can't be forecast as long range as El Nino or La Nina. So those always throw a wrench into the long range forecast because you can see that something may be happening maybe 2 to 3 weeks out before the event that were to change or shift the temperatures. So that's another thing. Pacific North American, that's another oscillation that we use to forecast on a 2 to 3 week basis in terms of the temperature. So that is just one of those. As it goes right now, though, again, I think December is going to be pretty close to average when it's all said and done, but I think there will be periods of cold and then periods of very, very warm temperatures. But once we get to the middle of January, that's whenever I think we start to see things run away. And then February should be very, very warm, staying with the typical La Nina pattern. So what we're looking at here, this is the Canadian climate model, and basically what we're seeing here is the active pattern come right on through where it's kind of white, where it's not either above or below normal. That's where the storm track is. Very similar to the map that I just showed you for a typical La Nina pattern. So that's important to recognize. The cold up here, the warm down here. You see above normal temperatures, the orange over the state of Florida and much of the Southeast. Now let's go to January. The cold anomalies start to turn green again. That intensifies the cold pretty much right where you would expect for a La Nina winter, and then we hang on to the warmth. Let's take this out into February, and same kind of deal. We have the same orientation as that ridge is out there, the cold kind of shooting through Canada into the Great Lakes, and then more warmth hanging on into the southeast corner of the United States. So the climate models are doing that. And remember, it's an average. So, of course, if you get one big cold snap somewhere embedded in there, the rest of the month is warm, it's still going to show warm at the end. So I think December is going to have the best opportunity for more of that variability. And then we, more often than not, are going to turn things warmer, I think, by the back half of January and then into February. One of the main reasons why I think we're going to see a pattern again, just like our typical jet stream, is because we're already kind of seeing that in the sea surface temperature anomalies. Now, we can clearly see where La Nina is, and we're looking at the equatorial Pacific. You see that blue there, the cold anomalies and the sea surface temperatures. That's the calling card of La Nina. But we also have this going on, the colder than normal temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska. When we get that, that typically allows us to build high pressure here. Jet stream ridges up and then comes down like that. How far it comes down depends on some of the other oscillations, but really then the core of the winter should be right up in that region when you're looking at it. So already seeing signs of that pattern kind of coming into fruition right there on the typical side of things. Again, since it's a weak La Nina, that pattern can be bullied and pushed around a little bit. It's not going to be exactly like that, but certainly on a more normal scale. Now, in addition to it being warmer than normal, it is typically drier than normal, as well as the active jet stream pattern is just to our north. So we're talking a wet Pacific Northwest, a wet Great Lakes, upper Midwest. Typically, if you like snow and you live in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa and the Dakotas, this is the kind of winter that gives you a really, really good opportunity for some good snow and really good cold. For us, Southeast Florida, Southeast and Florida, not Southeast Florida. We're in Central Florida. Southeast and Florida, we're drier than normal. So this is going to be something I think we're going to have to contend with as we get deeper into the winter. February especially, and then into spring, March, April is an onset of the drought. Again, kind of like what we saw last year. I want to show you this projection here, or this forecast from the National Interagency Fire Center. They're based out of Boise, Idaho. And this is for the month of February. And they kind of forecast the wildland, the wildfire risk across the country. And you see there, they do have the northern half of Florida highlighted with an above normal potential for a significant wildland fire threat. So they're also on board with it being dry, especially by the back half of the season. And I think that's when the impacts of La Nina could intensify before I think we switch things over to El Nino in time for hurricane season. That would be great because typically the hurricane season is quieter whenever we have an El Nino. Again, doesn't always do that. 2023 was active and we had an El Nino in that year as well. But that is a story for another time as we get ready to wrap up hurricane season. Done talking about the tropics. We're talking about winter here, but this is something we don't want to see because it got pretty ugly at times last year as we moved into the heart of wildfire season, which is March and April. But it looks like we could end the winter, especially the month of February, very warm and very dry.